Good morning and welcome to The Awakening. This is Jacqueline, and this morning I have the proud honor of introducing Devin Elon Maggi. This morning, the title of our podcast will be There is No War Against Humanity. Now, that comes from Devin's podcast from his YouTube channel. So look that up. It's a really, really good video. There's no war against humanity. Okay, so Devin, welcome to our morning podcast series. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. What other topics shall we talk about other than the awakening? I mean, if we're not describing the matters that truly matter, we're duping ourselves.
Well, and so you proclaim that there is no war being waged against humanity. But how can you say this, Devin? Is it not almost universally accepted that the current timeline that we are living in is overshadowed by deception, which is being used as a tool to enslave us mentally, physically, and spiritually? However, what I've heard you tell us is that, and I quote, the greatest idea is that we have to buy into a world view into which humanity is the prey of some hidden agenda or demonic force. But most human beings believe that there is a they. That's what you were saying. They want us sick. They want us confused. They want us stupid, to dumb us down. They are doing this to humanity. But you say that such statements are ultimately coming from an unawareness of our true self, our divinity within. When I look at all the various streams of media, and my heavens, there's so many that we can't even name them all. It does seem that everyone is hell-bent on explaining this is harmful, that is harmful, look out, look over there, look what she said, look what he is doing, look what they are all doing. And what do we continuously do? We all look, don't we? We look out there, not realizing that our focus compels everything. That where we place our attention is where our reality is derived. That the only obstacles are self-generated. That the outer confirms our inner obstacles with outer obstacles. In this current world condition, where humanity has really been brought to a crossroad, which I call an awakening event, Devin, it seems so difficult to even maneuver through this so-called awakening landscape with all the noise and chaos taking place around us. There is so much information being brought into the light, so to speak. And most of this information seems to be warning us of some impending and harmful event. Even the so-called truthers are screaming and shouting that if you know the truth, only by knowing the truth can you know your enemy. So we've got to show you who the enemy is by giving you the truth. However, and again, as you so eloquently stated, when our focus is what propels everything, we humans seem to be focusing on the dark agenda. And with that, it certainly seems that humanity is at war. And so it's intriguing to me, Devin, that you can say with such confidence, with such clarity and of sound mind, that there is no war against humanity. Will you please tell us why you believe this?
Well, first of all, I don't believe this. A belief is an accepted idea. When we believe in something, we are simply accepting a concept to be true. So simply believing in something doesn't truly put us in a state where we can understand that which we're observing. So I don't believe this. I know it. Now, obviously, this seems to be like the most asinine statement. There is no war against humanity. How dare anybody speak such nonsense? I mean, look around. There's tomfoolery right and left. There's corruption right and left. And we can verify this corruption without even digging that deep. You mentioned truthers, and in the truther movement, we have talk of hidden agendas, behind the scenes chaos that's coming to light, maybe with groups like QAnon, or even trickling into the mainstream media. So isn't it actually ignorant for me to say there is no war against humanity? But we first must take a look at the situation without the emotional duality, without funneling our reactions to this situation through a positive or a negative lens. So I'm not suggesting that we put a positive spin on the situation at hand and cover our eyes because we're going to engage in wishful thinking. No, I say there's no war against humanity because I know better than to point fingers at shadows that I myself do not completely know. And this is the problem when we're talking about any dark agenda or hidden force who is objectively parasitic and objectively wanting to rule over you and your family and your emotions and your safety. So when we back away from the situation, all of these screams and shouts, which insist that we should pay attention to a threat, all of this is under the realm of emotional manipulation and coercion. Because whenever we can point out a so-called monster in the external, we can then easily verify our own inner suffering, but blame it on that external ghost. And I call it a ghost because this realm we're in, this earth system we're in, is like a simulation of consciousness. And I say like a simulation of consciousness because we are not literally in a computer. It's not that we're the pawns of some higher or lower beings who have imprisoned us. Consciousness itself has been inverted. And to explain this in layman's terms, humanity has been engaging in illusion and delusion. Therefore, our surroundings in such a limited state have projected and produced what I call an energy extraction matrix. So the many components of this world, politics, religion, even science, education, medicine, social dynamics, the ins and outs of music and romance, everything within culture is obviously inverted. But what the truthers have done, and even many spiritualists, is claim that this inversion is due to an objective victimization of humanity by some higher ups. And it's always an elusive force. We could call them the elite. We could call them, the masterminds of the matrix if we want. But when we pull away from all of these external narratives of objective harm, you know what we find? We need not pay attention to these ghosts. In fact, it is maintaining the division between us versus them, humanity versus the controllers, which actually sustains that separation. So it's interesting. The very beings who attack the ghostly force that they know not of seem to think that attack or that attention will eradicate such a force.
Let me just stop you for just a moment, because you are on a roll and I love this. But what you are saying is that in this, what I hear you saying is that in this matrix of reality that is an actual inverted reality, that we seem to think that if we pay attention to the lies or the deceptions or the illusions, that attention that we're placing on those ghosts will dissolve the ghost. Like if I look at the ghost, if I look at the lie and really dissect it and take it all apart so that I can understand it and see the mechanics of it, that this giving this kind of attention, this beautiful revealing of the truth will actually dissolve this illusion. And so you're saying that's not the way you dissolve this illusion, these ghosts, this simulation, this matrix of simulation that you're talking about.
Yes, I'm suggesting if we approach anything or anyone or any topic with a shield or a sword, we'll get the shield and a sword right back. So how we approach anything is what we receive. And this relates to the Hermetic principle of as within, so without. Now, it's only when we can realize the divine interconnectedness of this realm and of the cosmos at large that we can maintain these externalized ghosts actually are temporary figments of the collective unconscious. And this sounds quite cartoonish, and it should. I mean, if we take a few steps back from the world stage, get out of the reactive mind, you know what we observe? Quite the cartoonish world. And you know where the biggest cartoonish claims are coming from? From the beings who think approaching these ghosts with a sword will resolve them. So many of the truthers and spiritualists and woke beings have immense passion. But we all know from personal experience, we are enriched not through rearranging the outer. It's never through rearranging the outer. I could feel unhappy and depressed and tell myself it's because I need to update my furniture, or because I haven't gone on a vacation, or because I need to simply get a new brand of coffee or something, etc., etc. We have the opportunity in this simulation of consciousness to make the choice to tap into our suffering in its reality, in its truest form, or funnel that into illusion and chase white rabbits into Wonderland, right?
So this is so beautiful. So are you suggesting that I have the power to create my external conditions or my external reality by tapping into that point of suffering, recognizing that suffering comes from within me? It's not because it's happening to me because of something going on outside of me. So that okay, go ahead.
Before I answer that question, I want to ask you, where are the hidden agendas and the external monsters when you close your eyes and go to bed?
In my mind, in my thinking, in my visions, in my dreams.
They only carry over if we deem them to be essential parts of our mind. So the dream space is your space. It's every individual space.
Or the perceived, the bill comes and I don't have the money to pay the bill. Or my child is going through terrible suffering in a relationship that's ending in a divorce, or my dear friend who's still very young is dying of cancer. So not only the dreams in my mind, as I go to bed and the big black wolf is chasing me through the forest, but also all of these external conditions, all of these external situations that are even magnified right now during this pandemic event that is not just touching me, but I'm supported by everyone else who it's touching them. And so we all have this camaraderie going on because it's touching all of us and it's so real. And we can all go through this suffering together. So there's kind of this dream state versus this external condition that we deem as reality. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And to that, I will say, if we don't understand how interconnected everything and everyone is at all times, then we will always observe a bump in the road to be a mistake. We will always observe, our own sickness or imbalance or a friend's loss or what have you as a terrible event, as a mistake. So before we can really get into what is what, we need to take a step back from all of this reactivity and judgment of how things should be. Now, you cannot serve two masters. Jesus Christ said this in the Gospels. And many in the same conversation will maintain there's a great awakening. All is divine. Things are right on track. And yet, supplement that with there is a war against humanity. And somehow, many have convinced themselves that we can blend these perspectives, but they oppose each other. Because if there is an awakening happening and all is orchestrated in divine timing, you know what this means? These wars against humanity are therefore a part of the awakening. Ooh, now we're getting somewhere. Maybe, just maybe, our observations of such a cruel, masochistic, and sadistic world is a complete inverted reflection of our truest selves. And that if we are to take these narratives seriously, it's the same thing as battling with our own shadows. Now, let's get logical here, because many of us aren't very impressed by such woo-woo talk, or so it's deemed. Nothing has ever materialized in a way that we are truly harmed. And we can give concrete examples. Remember ISIS? Remember that scary terrorist group who was going to, eradicate all Christians in the world, and we needed the government's help to put them out? What happened to them? They went dead. They went cold. That narrative never panned out in the way we were told. What about what happened with Saddam Hussein or with bin Laden? Or what about the FEMA camps that we could clearly see even back in the late 2000s? You see, I was in the truther movement in the late 2000s, and we had videos and videos of plastic coffins being driven across the countries. 12 years later, there has not been a roundup. So this reality has some splaining to do, because apparently there is always a dead end when it comes to these projections of future impending doom. And now we're dealing with the 5G rollout, which is not panning out in any way that the truthers have maintained. We have been told from many voices, all of which propagate fear, and this is how we should know something is either a lie or incomplete.
Well, and I hate to interrupt, but that word fear is really, to me, so very important, because even when I go to the truth side, the 5G frequencies are going to cause all of these, diseases, and the vaccination and the chips and the nanotechnologies that are going to, take over my bloodstream, and that energy can be pulsed into the environment, and I can be controlled now through these energy pulsing technologies, and to become like a even more enslaved than what we already humans believe that we are. And yet this is the truth. The truthers want to say, oh, this is the truth. And yet in looking at the truth, there's still very much fear surrounding the truth. The deep state cabal, the creating the socialistic agenda, the fiat reset, where you can't buy anything without your card, and yet scripture tells us, the word says, think only on these things that are lovely, of good report, that are noble. And yet these, even though they are seemingly truth statements, I don't feel good. I'm not feeling happy. I'm not feeling blessed. I'm not feeling abundant. I'm not feeling like, I'm immortal and having an infinite perspective on reality is just grand and glorious. So there is kind of this confusion that even in the truth, I'm not getting that feeling that I thought awakening was supposed to be all about.
Perhaps it's incomplete truth then. I mean, there are many truths that we can realize on the way to ultimate truth and self-realization. But the feeling is the compass.
Yes.
So whenever we engage in content and we leave it feeling reactive or fearful or feeling small, that should tell us that piece of information is nothing to take to heart. Now, this is what the truthers would say. They would say, how dare you ignore the objective information? You are simply putting a positive spin and closing your eyes and wishing to melt into some ooey gooey rainbow light of the Care Bear universe. This is not the message. In fact, you're hearing my voice. I'm not showering this topic with positivity or negativity. It is at the center. It is within the middle path that we find we can merge all polarities. And when we do that, no so-called agenda affects us. Now, we should know that the same tactics the truthers are unknowingly using are the exact same tactics the mainstream media has been using since its invention. How often during a news program do you hear emotional appeals from the reporters? Our hearts go out to humanity. We are all trying to pray for what's good and what's just, what a terrible event, what a terrible natural disaster. There is much virtue signaling when it comes to how we should feel and how we should interact with this content. Okay, well, the same thing happens in these conversations of dark agendas. Now, earlier you asked the question, so do I create my reality based on what I consent to? And I'll say yes, but let's dive into that a bit, because it is not through wishful thinking that we create new realities. And this seems to be how many interpret the law of attraction or law of manifestation. It's kind of this empty idea where our beliefs or our mental acceptances is what produce our external reality. Here's what I'm saying. I'm saying this external reality, with all of its scariness, it's an inverted reflection of the collective unconscious, and it's outside of us right now, so we can observe it. Because if these aspects of us remained unmanifested inside, we wouldn't have the opportunity to awaken. So it's actually crucial in this awakening to feel a bit victimized at first. You see, I'm not saying we should immediately approach these things with such an understanding.
But at least to look inside of myself and see the victim that I'm feeling myself to be. Is that what you're saying? In other words, that's a reality going on within me. Is that what I hear you say? So you're saying have the courage to go in and look at those things that are going on inside of myself. Is that what you're?
Exactly. And these realizations are oftentimes sparked from looking at these ghosts and the shadows. The problem is we need to put down the phone, get the message and then hang up. So
but wait a minute. When I feel victimized, I need to run out and call someone and talk about and tell them what's going on, because in letting this go with my best friend and telling him all of these things that I'm feeling and going through, then I feel like I'm getting somewhere.
Who drives your mind? It is you. If you were to tell me or anyone any other answer, that would obviously be false. Who puts food in your mouth? You do. Who decides what you do with your time? You do. And of course, there's certain limitations here. We're all bound by certain constructs like money, like time. Sometimes we have to clean or do things we don't want to. But without a sovereign perspective, we will always be swimming uphill. So why don't we realize that bliss is already here? Well, probably because finding that and accepting it makes us responsible. So it's actually easier to approach existence with a victim mindset, because you can simply point fingers. And whenever we're feeling disempowered or like our lives is in shambles in any which way, How convenient. We can pull up our laptops, we can turn on the news, we can open the newspaper. There's a million and one narratives which will tell us exactly why we're feeling this way, right? Maybe it's systematic racism. Maybe it's a bill that was passed. Maybe it's the current president. Who cares? Who knows? Nobody really knows. So it is actually the most infantile way to interact with any realm, to correspond humanity's situation with something outside. I mean, any little kid can find the bad guy in a movie, right? Mommy, there he is. Go get him. It takes a true sophistication to recognize the finger pointing leads to more of what you're pointing at. Now, there's an allegory that we can use to further understand this. The Disney movie Moana. It's a newer Disney movie. Some older folks may not have seen it. But Moana is a story revolving around the Emerald Heart of Te Fiti. Now, Te Fiti is the goddess of the world Moana lives in. She touches everything with abundance, but her heart was stolen. It's an emerald stone that was stolen. And because of this, she turned into a demon who plagued the land with scarcity. So we fast forward to this scarcity reaching a climax, kind of like what we see here. There seems to be a climax around the corner. And Moana's village is hell-bent on accepting such scarcity and doing what they can. They throw their arms in the air when there's no fish left to catch and there's no more food and everything is dying. But Moana, the daughter of the king, she decides to go on a quest, and she goes on a sailboat with the heart of Te Fiti. She goes through trials and tribulations because she knows that abundance can be resurrected. And she approaches the demon who used to be the goddess, replaces the heart, allegorizing approaching existence with ease, no matter what shadows lie in front of us. And then as soon as that emerald heart is replaced, the demon transforms back into the abundant goddess, and instantly the land is transformed. So if Moana had just stayed in her standard worldview, if she had never left the island and escapaded to soar to greater heights, then nothing would have been restored. So when we say mainstream narratives, most of us probably think of, I don't know, Black Lives Matter or any of the programs we're hearing in the mainstream news right now. But what about the mainstream narratives in the truther or spiritual movements? Absolutely nobody is proclaiming this message with such fervor. It's because it's so easy to snowball ourselves into a certain way of belief, a certain way of thinking, rather.
When you say this message, are you referring to the reclamation of divinity, which changes the entire landscape of reality? What is that? What you said? No one is claiming this message with such fervor. The message you're talking about is this reclamation of the heart, correct?
Of the heart.
I just want to clarify when you say no one's speaking of this message. I want to clarify what you mean by this message.
This message is a simple one, but it can take a little bit of hoop jumping to really get it, because we must turn around everything we think to be true and accurate. So this message is all about merging our experiences and our polarities into the heart space. Like you said, reclaiming divinity, which has always existed behind our reactivity, behind the illusion and self-delusion. So we should be honest with ourselves and not try to rearrange the outer in such drastic ways if we can't even rearrange our inner. Because humanity ultimately is a collective made up of individuals. So even if a ruthless government was taken down right now, immediately, would that solve a nation's problems? Because if the individual consciousness isn't altered, then they will simply collectively produce a similar situation. So if you opened up the doorway to paradise to most beings and actually showed them the tree of life, most beings wouldn't even know it. Most beings would actually spit on it.
You know, there's a quote my father would say when I was a child, the door to hell is locked from the inside. In other words, you can leave at any moment. And yet, what would we do? You know, I've often sat in my meditation and in understanding, you know, without a vision, my people perish, and asking, okay, money is not an issue. I'm in the Garden of Eden, like you're saying, like right now, the dark cabal, the evil state, all of these horrific terrors that are taking place that you know, in an instant, in a twinkling of an eye, it's all gone. We've been given the message, you know, it's being shouted from every rooftop. We're free, we're free. What would I create? And that is, to me, such an interesting place, because I find in that place still my mind has a difficulty in sustaining that message. So is that kind of what you're saying?
I imagine it's difficult for many to sustain the message because they're still branding it within dualities. They're still trying to reach the positive. Many are wishing the negative in the positive, when emphasizing either strengthens both. So you're actually talking about what, you know, Christ talked about, the death of, and I know this is not what it says, but the death of duality, or the death of that duality reality, and coming into a brand new self, which in that new self beingness, in that state, is a different matrix, a matrix of what, if it's not duality, what would you call that matrix? We call it singularity.
Okay.
And I have many videos on this topic. And you mentioned
singularity, you mean unity consciousness, that just all is one?
Well,
the wholeness.
Let's slow down.
I
Let's
just
slow
want to
down
make
a
sure
bit.
that our terms, there's so many terms for the same thing that I know that getting through the term landscape can also be confusing. Like, what do you mean by ego? What do you mean by divine mind? What do you mean by singularity versus duality? So I always like to make sure that, in receiving your message, that we understand your terms and how you are using them. So we're talking about, if it's not duality, what is it? And you're saying singularity. And so that term singularity, tell me about that. In other words, I want to move from this matrix, this energy extraction matrix that operates with a simulation of objective forms. And I want to cross over and into an awakened state, which we talk about the new earth, the new world, crossing the Jordan into the promised land, all of these messages. And you're saying that we're moving from duality into singularity, that's the new energy. It's not an energy extraction matrix. Now it's a life stream flow of divine energy within a singularity reality matrix.
Duality is the this and the that, the right versus the wrong, the good versus the evil, the light versus the dark, the righteous versus the damned. Heaven, hell.
In media, they always want the pro and the con. So they get the con on there, and you've got this intense emotional reason why it should not be this way. And then you buy into it. Oh my gosh, absolutely. I see the perspective. And then, but now let's do the pro. And now you have the pro come on, and it's even a heightened state of emotional belief system. And that perspective is so amazingly that, oh my gosh, now I can see the pro, and I'm so confused because I really don't know what is con and what is pro. Is that the kind of duality you're talking about?
Well, I'd appreciate if I'd be able to explain this in full without any interruption.
Okay.
Yes. So what I was getting to is that it is when we take two ideas and pit them against each other, a duel, right? Dual is in the word duality. And singularity is very simple. It is the state we're in when the dualities merge. When the duel and the war between opposites is resolved. We need to resolve the war between opposites. However, most beings have constructed a belief system and thus a personality and way of interacting with the world, which is rooted in duality. Therefore, singularity might sound like a threat. You mentioned that there's this new wave of divinity, a newer self that we are tapping into. But I would say it is the true self which always exists, and that we're not inventing anything new. We're not constructing a new mask to put on. That's not at all what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting all we need to do is take away the crud, the waste, the illusion, the falsity. And then through that process of purging, which takes courage, tenacity, and honesty, we then find, there's a spark, an eternal one, which holds all of the secrets of the cosmos, that there's a flame of wisdom that never died, but it was simply twisted and mutilated into all of these dualities. Now, another perspective we could take when we're talking about the war against humanity which you and I both know to be non-existent, is that a parasitic consciousness, by definition, will always destroy itself. So let's say there is us versus them. Let's say there is a dark cabal, an elite force, performing child sacrifice, trying to engage humanity in as much chaos as possible. Okay, where do you think that consciousness is headed? Where do you think the so-called beings interacting with these states are leading themselves towards? We don't really have to see these things as ghosts if we don't want to, but we can maintain that parasitism requires a host. A parasite doesn't produce its own independent energy. So what are we doing when we're sending our emotional energy towards all of these dualities and narratives? So if we don't want to feed the monster, if we don't want to feed the parasite, let it rot in its own mess. Because you didn't consciously create these realities. You did not sign the bills to imprison whole countries or families. So why then should you feel responsible for them? So when we only take responsibility for what we're consciously creating, then we focus more on our microcosmic realities. So we're microcosms of the macrocosm, which means when we harness on the expansion of our own fractals, we're doing the most service to humanity. We're doing the most service to this realm. But that's not what's been marketed to us. It's been marketed that it is community service. It is helping each other with protests or with treaty signing, or what have you. And these things are fine. If we really wish to engage in them, we can. Nobody is stopping us. But it is the true inner transformation which is resolving this scary situation. So let the parasites rot.
So, you're talking about parasitism does not exist without a host. In other words, it's got to receive energy outside of its own self. And so by giving your emotional response to the psychological terrorism that this parasite continues to live, is that what you call, is that how you would describe the energy extraction matrix? Is that how the parasite, Illuminati, the elite running the world, the demonic forces continue to thrive and exist?
But they're not thriving. This is the biggest fallacy. We assume that because the control system is bulking up its tactics, that it's growing, that it's winning, that humanity is on the losing side.
Correct.
But a vampire wishes to remain in the shadows as much as possible and only wants to come out for feeding. So the more a vampire's coming out, the less energy it's getting.
This is good. This is really good stuff. I love that. In other words, if we can kind of shift the perspective from, oh my gosh, look at this increase of chaos, that seems that the cabal, the elite, is gaining ground over humanity. They're winning. But what you are saying is, can I say almost the opposite?
it's completely that turned upside down, because we have to turn everything upside down in this upside down land to really make sense of the nonsensical. So why do people manipulate? Disregarding the governments, why do people manipulate? We manipulate because we want something, and we're not getting that currently. So we got to go after what we feel we deserve. Therefore, the more one manipulates, the less stable one is in themselves. Okay, let's transpose this idea to the situation at hand. There are so many programs of deception. And I ask, why? Somebody's hungry, obviously, and not getting what they used to. So I'm bringing this up because even if we wish to maintain external versus the inner, no amount of battle, no amount of duel will ever solve it. So it's really irrelevant whether you buy into what I'm saying, that these are ghosts, whether you maintain their independent creatures. Trust is only possible if we trust ourselves. Trust in everything and everyone and in the direction of the cosmos. And most beings actually don't trust themselves. Most beings can barely even look in the mirror for more than a minute. So how on earth are we going to make sure reality is prim and proper and in alignment with all that is true and life-giving and regenerative, if we ourselves don't feel that life within? So it is so infantile to maintain the illusory war against humanity, and all cosmic intelligences are actually laughing at the situation because it's hilarious. What's happening here is nothing less than funny. And humanity has none of my sympathy. Humanity doesn't need to have your emotional reaction or mine, because everybody in each moment is reflecting their complete essence in all of their decisions, words, actions, interactions, thoughts. Therefore, where we are in each now moment is the culmination of the energies we've input and thus output. What we put in is what we receive. And the more one dares to figure out themselves, the more one receives.
Well, I can hardly believe it. We are at the end of our 1 hour chat, as you called it. I really hate to end here. So maybe we can continue this conversation again, but my heavens, what a wealth of information you are, Devin. And everyone, I just want you to know that you can find Devin on his YouTube channel. Devin, you want to tell us where we can find you?
I have 2 channels. One channel is called Devin Elon Magi, and the other one is called Flat Earth Paradise.
So thank you, everyone. And Devin, hope you will come back. I just absolutely, there goes my timer telling us that we're at the end. I just absolutely love you. And I love the message that you are giving, and just bless you. Namaste.
Wonderful to chat again, Jacqueline.
All right. Bye.